Welcome to LatinoAmericans with your host and narrator, Jacqueline Torres.
Everything you need to know about Latino history by the author Himilce Novas. She is an expert in Latino history, culture, literature, and human rights. We will start today with how did Puerto Ricans react to becoming a U.S. protectorate? Puerto Rico's transition to a U.S. protectorate on the heels of Spain's cession of the island to the United States at the end of the Spanish-American War was rather difficult for most islanders. Puerto Ricans did not believe in the Roosevelt corollary. That is, that it was the duty of the United States to instruct them in how to conduct themselves like citizens of a progressive civilized nation. The language barrier, which necessitated the use of interpreters and translators so that Puerto Rican leaders and American military authorities could communicate, created tensions and misunderstanding. The cultural barrier, which caused Americans to question even the most minute details of the Puerto Rican legal system and economic system and of Puerto Rican public finance and public administration, was even harder to overcome. On April 2, 1900, almost 2 years after officially assuming control of Puerto Rico, the United States passed the Foraker Act, which made the island an unincorporated territory of the United States. According to this piece of legislation, Puerto Ricans were neither American citizens nor citizens of an independent nation. A civilian government replaced the transitional military government and allowed for the popular election of Puerto Ricans to both houses of the Puerto Rican legislature, where they could implement laws related to internal affairs. However, the United States retained the authority to appoint a governor, and that governor, who was empowered to veto any legislation and had the final say, was to be an American, not a Puerto Rican. The Foraker Act also put an extra economic squeeze on Puerto Rico by imposing a heavy tariff on the island's exports, the aim of which was to protect American sugar and tobacco interests from Puerto Rican competition. Puerto Ricans were not terribly pleased with the Foraker Act and their political status. In an open letter to President McKinley in the very first issue of the Puerto Rican Herald, the bilingual newspaper he launched in 1901 in New York City, Luis Muñoz Rivera's, by then Puerto Rico's leading statesman, he would represent the island in Congress from 1910 to 1916, wrote that the Foraker Act was, quote, unworthy of the United States, which imposes it, and of Puerto Ricans who have to endure it, end of quote. Disenchantment over the state of affairs on the island led to the formation of the Unionist Party of Puerto Rico. The party's platform repudiated U.S. domination and supported any of three options for Puerto Rico: statehood, nationhood, or semi-independence under American protection. Puerto Ricans remained non-citizens of the world as dictated by the Foraker Act until the gathering threat of World War I, as well as unremitting pressure from the islanders, prompted President Woodrow Wilson to sign the Jones Act on March 2, 1917. With one sweep of the pen, the president granted U.S. citizenship to all Puerto Ricans. Puerto Ricans had the right to refuse U.S. citizenship, but few did so since refusing citizenship meant relinquishing many civil rights. Only 288 individuals passed up the initial offer of citizenship. Many of these opted for citizenship later on. The Jones Act also stipulated that a non-Puerto Rican governor appointed by the U.S. president would continue to rule over the island's internal affairs and its new American citizens. As it turned out, Puerto Ricans did not inherit all of the fundamental rights of U.S. citizenship, such as the right to vote in U.S. presidential elections, but they instantly acquired most of the obligations of U.S. citizenship. One exception was they were exempted from filing federal income taxes, including serving in the military if conscripted. During World War I, about 8,000 Puerto Ricans were drafted into the U.S. Armed Forces, and the Puerto Rican people donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to the war effort. In World War II, the number of Puerto Ricans who fought alongside their fellow Americans rose significantly to 65,000. During the 1920s, Puerto Ricans continued to demand greater autonomy in local affairs. Their demands intensified when the Great Depression hit in 1929, sending the sugar economy into a nosedive. Puerto Rican workers found themselves teetering on the edge of starvation. During his tenure as governor of Puerto Rico from 1929 to 1932, Theodore Roosevelt Jr., Teddy Roosevelt's son, seeking to alleviate the suffering of the Puerto Rican people, launched several economic and cultural programs favorable to Puerto Ricans and spoke of greater self-government for the people. His efforts were not enough. In 1930, as the Depression raged, Pedro Albizu Campos assumed the leadership of the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party, PNP, which was formed in 1922, and transformed it into a dominant force in Puerto Rico's struggle for independence. He took up the cause at every turn, as in 1934, when nationalists rushed to support thousands of jibaros, or farm workers, who had walked off the sugarcane fields in a wildcat strike. Concerned that a mass revolutionary movement was forming, Puerto Rican local authorities lashed out at the nationalists, killing some members. On March 5, 1936, Albizu Campos and other leading nationalists were officially charged with conspiring to overthrow the U.S. government. At their trial, the jury, 7 of whose 12 members were Puerto Rican, refused to convict, so the authorities handpicked a new jury. 10 of the jurors on this new jury were Anglo-Americans, and consequently, this new jury had no difficulty reaching a guilty verdict. Albizu Campos and other nationalists received prison sentences of 6 to 10 years. Albizu Campos served 6 years from 1937 to 1943. The nationalists would not be stopped in their campaign to bring independence to Puerto Rico. In 1937, the PNP organized a march to commemorate the abolition of slavery in Puerto Rico. It was to take place on Palm Sunday, March 21, 1937, in the city of Ponce. The local authorities granted permits for the event but then revoked them. PNP members took to the streets of Ponce anyway, and the police opened fire on them, killing 22 and wounding over 100. In this atmosphere of, quote, unanticipated, close quote, violence, 2 bills recommending independence for Puerto Rico were introduced in the U.S. Congress. Both bills succumbed to stiff opposition, with the opposers arguing that the island's social and economic conditions had to improve before independence could be seriously considered.
Thank you for listening to Latino Americans with your host and narrator, Jacqueline Torres.